Hello, and welcome to Guitar Gods Unleashed. Today on Guitar Gods Unleashed, the Singers of Ritchie Blackmore and why they left. Or did he fire them? Please subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching. Today we're going to talk about Ritchie Blackmore, the Deep Purple and Rainbow legend, born in April 1945, and we're going to talk about the singers that he's worked with and some of the circumstances, whether he fired them or whether they left, or do we even know. But anyway, Ritchie Blackmore, he was a session guitar player in the 1960s. That's how he got his start. He was in bands such as the Outlaws, and he worked with Screaming Lord Sutch and Glenda Collins, and there was loads of other ones. What we're interested in is when he formed Deep Purple in the late 60s, and from then on. So, well, Ritchie Blackmore, he met John Lord in 1967, and they formed Deep Purple. Originally they were called Roundabout, and it was like some sort of supergroup thing. And they had Rod Evans on vocals, and Ian Pace was in the band. Rod Evans, he was the singer. He came from a band called The Maze, and he'd worked with Pace previously in that. But Ritchie Blackmore, yeah, he changed the name from Roundabout to Deep Purple in 1968, and they recorded 3 albums with Rod Evans on vocals. They were Shades of Deep Purple, The Book of Taliesin, and the self-titled Deep Purple. Rod Evans, he was gone by July 1969, he left. Ritchie Blackmore wanted to go in like a sort of heavier hard rock direction. He'd seen Led Zeppelin, and that's the direction he kind of wanted to go in. Now, in an interview with Mexican magazine Concrete in 1980, Rod Evans said this about why he left Deep Purple in 1969. And Rod Evans said, "Well, it's hard to say because there were personal conflicts between Ritchie Blackmore and me. As you can see, all the lineups that they've been through during all the years, I didn't want to continue with them after 2 years." Then they said it was the ego. Yes, there was an ego in Ritchie, who liked the heavy rock, and John Lord, who preferred the classic. Ritchie was obsessed to be a guitarist like Clapton or Beck, and to be the star. So it seems like Rod Evans didn't get along very well with Ritchie Blackmore there, and he decided to go away and do his own thing, and he started a band called Captain Beyond, and he did 2 albums with them, but he left in 1973, and apparently he went on to medical school or something. But it's funny because Rod Evans, in about 1980, after Deep Purple had finished, Rod Evans was in another version of Deep Purple called Deep Purple, and they were touring and under that name, and he ended up being sued. And they played some gigs, and apparently it was a disaster. Like, the band were like, the chairs were thrown at them and everything. There were riots and stuff. And yeah, Rod Evans, he was sued for it, and then he sort of faded into obscurity after this. No one knows where he is or what happened to him. But Rod Evans was out the band anyway, and then enter Ian Gillan. So after Ritchie Blackmore had seen Led Zeppelin, he wanted a better frontman, basically, for the band to go in this heavier direction. And he'd seen Robert Plant, and he was like really impressed. And originally, Ritchie Blackmore wanted this guy called Terry Reid, who was known as Super Lungs, who actually, incidentally, Jimmy Page also wanted for the New Yardbirds, who became Led Zeppelin as well, but he declined. So Ritchie Blackmore, he met Ian Gillan through a mutual friend called Mick Underwood. Mick Underwood had played with Ritchie Blackmore in the Outlaws, and Mick Underwood had also played with Ian Gillan in Episode 6, which is a band that Ian Gillan was in. So Ian Gillan joined the band in 1969, and Deep Purple went on to record their Concerto for Group and Orchestra in September that year. And now Mark II, this was it. It was the classic lineup. It was there. And they began touring and putting out albums in the 70s. The first one, it was In Rock in 1970, and they did Fireball in 1971, Machine Head in 72. The live album Made in Japan came out in 1972, and they did Who Do We Think We Are in 1973. Now, the problem is, Ian Gillan quit, apparently, in the summer of 1973. Ritchie Blackmore said that the band was exhausted. There were tensions between him and Gillan. They didn't get on very well. Now, they may have had magic on stage and did some great stuff in the studio, but they didn't get on personally. They had creative differences. The tensions were too much, so Ian Gillan left. And Ritchie Blackmore said they were exhausted. They needed a break. He had hepatitis. So that was the end of that. So they were going to need to get a new singer. Now, Ian Gillan, he formed the Ian Gillan Band, and he put out an album called Child in Time in 1975. Child in Time, named after the Deep Purple song Child in Time. Now, Deep Purple, looking for a new singer, they actually wanted Paul Rodgers of Free, but he was too busy doing his Bad Company thing, so he was not available to do it. That would have been interesting if Paul Rodgers had come into Deep Purple then. They managed to get Glenn Hughes from Trapeze, and he came in on vocals and bass, but they needed a frontman as well, and they got David Coverdale. Blackmore was really impressed with his voice, and Mark III was born. Deep Purple Mark III. So they recorded 2 albums in 1974, Burn and Stormbringer. It's incredible that 2 albums were coming out. Bands don't seem to do that these days, I don't think. Do they do that these days? Now it seems to take years between albums, but back then, Deep Purple put out 2 albums that year. But Ritchie Blackmore was not happy with the direction that it was going in, because he thought it was getting too funky and too finger-clicking, and he decided to quit the band in 1975. June 1975, he'd officially left. Now, he went on to form the band Rainbow. Rainbow was named after the Rainbow Bar and Grill in West Hollywood, California, and he needed a singer, and, well, actually it started because the tensions began because Ritchie Blackmore wanted to record a song, Black Sheep of the Family. The guys in Deep Purple didn't want to do it, so Ritchie Blackmore went off to do it anyway, in the studio, and he was just going to put it out as a single, and he knew Ronnie James Dio because Elf, which was the band that Ronnie James Dio was in, had toured with Deep Purple for quite a few years. So he got to know Ritchie Blackmore, and Ritchie Blackmore asked Ronnie James Dio to come and sing on this stuff. Ronnie James Dio accepted. Instead of it just being a single release, it turned into a whole album, and the album was called Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. And that was the album that came out in 1975, and Ronnie James Dio was now the singer of Rainbow, this new band. Now, just as a side note, Deep Purple carried on without Ritchie Blackmore. They carried on with, Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. And Tommy Bolin on guitar. They put out another album called Come Taste the Band in 1975, and it was critically acclaimed, but Tommy Bolin, he was into drugs and everything, and he did a couple of solo albums, but then Tommy Bolin passed away, and that was kind of like Deep Purple fizzled out, and that was the end of them. And David Coverdale went on to do Whitesnake after that, but that was the end of Deep Purple for a while. So Ritchie Blackmore was in Rainbow. Things were going well. He was putting out albums with Ronnie James Dio on vocals. They did Rising in 76 as well, and they did Long Live Rock and Roll in 1978. But Ritchie Blackmore now decided he wanted to do away with the sword and sorcery type lyrics. He wanted to get away from that, and he wanted to go in a more commercial direction, and I don't think he felt like Ronnie James Dio was up for that. So Dio ended up leaving and joining Black Sabbath before leaving and going solo. Now, Ritchie Blackmore was accused of being a bit of a dictator when it came to working with people and firing band members and stuff, and he said this in a Sounds interview in 1979. He said, if they were good enough, they'd still be in the band. I'm not putting down the other members who were in the band, but no one has ever left Rainbow. It's a fact, not a confrontation, just, well, you didn't quite make it. You'll have to do other things. And he said this about Ronnie James Dio. He said, Ronnie is a very good singer. I still like him, but he was becoming very lackadaisical. I'm sure if he were here now, he would argue the point, but the fact is, Ronnie was not contributing what he should have done, and he knows that. So I think that might be Blackmore talking about going in a more commercial direction. Ronnie James Dio just wanted to write songs the way he wanted to, but Blackmore wanted more commercial stuff. For the last 2 years, I would put down the riff, he continued, the progressions, given the basic melody, and he would write the lyrics. I found that in the past year, he wasn't really doing that. He was bitching about the fact that it was Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, and I'm going, look, I've tried after 3 years to make it just Rainbow, not my Rainbow. When people leave the band, we don't give too many reasons because we don't want to hinder their career. But if someone's not pulling their weight, then I will not put up with someone who's second rate. I'm not going to jump on stage and say, it's all right, ladies and gentlemen. I know they're not very good, but they are my friends like most bands do. So yeah, Ritchie Blackmore's laying the law down here. He continued, he said a couple of people in the band were taking quite a few drugs and consequently were falling asleep while they were playing because they were partying all night. I gave them the sack. It's incredible how these people react. They say, how dare he do that to me? But what have they got to offer other than looking the part? So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can disagree with Blackmore on that part there, He was a serious man and he was taking it seriously, and, he had to have some sort of commercial breakthrough, He also wanted to make some money as well, not just, fade into obscurity like a lot of people did. So he knew what it was all about and he was very serious. Anyway, so interestingly, Christmas 1978, would you believe it, Ritchie Blackmore actually asked Ian Gillan to join Rainbow. He actually wanted him to join the band, but Ian Gillan declined because he was too busy doing his own band, like the Gillan Band. So, I mean, imagine if Ian Gillan had joined Rainbow in the late 70s. That would have been interesting, but I just couldn't have seen that lasting. Do you think that would have lasted? Maybe for one album, but I don't think it would have worked out. Now, Blackmore did find a new singer, and it was the ex-Marble singer, Graham Bonnet, and he joined in 1979, and he had that commercial edge to his voice. They recorded Down to Earth in 1979, released the singles All Night Long and Since You've Been Gone, which was a Russ Ballard song. It was actually a cover version, but it did enormously well in the singles charts and made Rainbow commercially successful. Now, Graham Bonnet didn't last long, and he actually left quite soon due to frustrations working with Blackmore. And Not really sure why. Blackmore, in an interview, said he wasn't happy with Richie Blackmore said he wasn't happy with Graham Bonnet's haircut. And he said he even thought about smashing his guitar over the back of his head on stage. But Graham Bonnet left to do a solo album called Line Up in 1981, and then he joined the Michael Schenker group MSG, and he did Assault Attack on that album, and then he joined Alcatraz with Yngwie Malmsteen, the Swedish virtuoso. But Blackmore was looking for a new singer, and he found one in Lynn Turner. Lynn Turner was previously of the band Fandango, but they'd split up, so he was available, and he came in and they recorded the album Difficult to Cure in 1981, and they had another big hit with I Surrender, which was another Rush ballad song. And then they did Straight Between the Eyes in 1982 and Bent Out of Shape in 1983. There was also another Rainbow album that came out in 1986 called Final Vinyl. But around 1983, Deep Purple were itching to get Blackmore back with Gillan, the management, and Blackmore accepted the offer in 1984, and he came back to record Perfect Strangers to critical acclaim. That was the Mark II classic lineup back together again. So after a bit of touring, the Perfect Strangers album, then they did the House of Blue Light in 1987. Blackmore and Gillan were not happy with the results, it seems. Blackmore felt like something was missing, and Ian Gillan felt like something was missing, and the fans apparently the critics felt like it was more like a Rainbow album than a Deep Purple album. But, maybe it's a little bit underrated, that album. But Ian Gillan didn't last that much longer. He left to do his own thing. He did his own album in 1988 called Accidentally on Purpose with Roger Glover, and this may have annoyed Blackmore a little bit that Gillan was doing his own thing on the side, maybe. And then he went on to do another album called Naked Thunder in 1989, and he was out of the band. He left, or he was fired. Did he leave, or was he fired? So Deep Purple was looking for a new singer, and they actually wanted the guy from Survivor, Jimmy Jamison, but he declined the offer. There was lots of other people that were considered, Brian Howe or Doug Pinnick from King's X. Even David Coverdale they thought about, but he was too busy riding the crest of the wave of the Slip of the Tongue tour. He was too busy with Whitesnake, and they got Lynn Turner. Now, the rest of the band weren't too happy with Lynn Turner coming into Deep Purple because he was an ex-Rainbow singer, but Richie Blackmore really liked him and wanted him in it. Lynn Turner had just finished working with Yngwie Malmsteen, leaving after lots of tensions there with him. But he was now in Deep Purple, and he recorded the album Slaves and Masters in 1990. Now, the band continued for a little while, until 1993, but Lynn Turner was basically forced out because Ian Gillan was coming back into the mix again. The Mark II lineup would be back together again. And Lynn Turner apparently was paid off. He was paid $250,000 to basically just go away and step aside. It's quite a lot of money in them days, but yeah, so Ian Gillan was back, and they went on tour. They put out a live video, DVD, Come Hell or High Water, and they recorded an album, The Battle Rages On. But tensions were too much again. There was even an incident where Ian Gillan put ketchup in Blackmore's spaghetti, and Blackmore smashed the spaghetti into Ian Gillan's face, and they nearly had a punch-up or something. Loads of crazy stuff going on. So Blackmore left Deep Purple for the final time in 1993. And Joe Satriani, the guitar wizard himself, was brought in to finish the remaining tour, but he didn't want to be a permanent member of Deep Purple. That's when they got Steve Morse, formerly of Dixie Dregs. He came in and was the new Deep Purple guitarist. Blackmore was out. So Richie Blackmore then formed the new version of Rainbow, and he was looking for a new singer, and he found a new singer in Doogie White, the Scottish singer, and they recorded an album together called Strangers in Us All in 1995. Just interestingly, on that album, there were some backing vocals done by Candice Night, who ended up becoming Richie Blackmore's songwriting partner and wife later. But in 1997, Richie Blackmore disbanded Rainbow and went off to do Blackmore's Night with Candice Night, who was his girlfriend, songwriting partner, soulmate, and future wife. And now Richie Blackmore was not playing hard rock anymore. He was playing medieval Renaissance folk rock music, but it wasn't hard rock music, it was just this folk music. And that's what he's been doing for many, many years. And they put out some albums. They put out Shadow of the Moon in 1997, Under a Violet Moon in 1999, Fires at Midnight in 2001, and many other albums followed this. Until 2015, Richie Blackmore got the itch to come back and play some hard rock. In June 2016, Rainbow returned with Ronnie Romero on vocals, the Lords of Black singer. And they played the German Monsters of Rock show, and a few other dates, and they played some dates in 2017 in the UK, and they actually put out 2 live albums from these shows in 2016 2018, and they played some more shows. And then Richie Blackmore was asked if there was going to be a new album, and he said, well, it's just supposed to be a bit of fun. Yeah, I think he was just doing it for a bit of fun and probably making a bit of money on the side as well, maybe just testing the water. But Rainbow actually put out 2 new singles. They put out Waiting for a Sign, and then in 2019 they put out a song called The Storm. which was a reworking of an old Blackmore's Night tune. So in 2019, Rainbow continued with some dates with Ronnie Romero on vocals, but then the pandemic hit, so COVID then killed the chance of any new Rainbow album from happening. Blackmore went back to doing Blackmore's Night with Candice Night, so that seemed like the end of Rainbow. And then in October 2023, Ronnie Romero, he decided to officially leave the band of Rainbow, so it looks like Rainbow won't be a thing anymore. So 2025, Ritchie Blackmore, he's now 80 years old in April, and it's unlikely he's going to go back on tour, I think, playing any sort of hard rock music. I can't imagine him at that age going back out on a tour. You never know, but I don't think he will. And I mean, I'd love to see him back on stage just one more time with Deep Purple, just a guest appearance or something. I mean, it'd be cool if they played Highway Star and Ritchie Blackmore walked out playing the solo or something. That'd be really awesome, but I just don't think that's going to happen. But Ritchie Blackmore, he's playing some dates with Blackmore's Night in April and May 2025 in the US, in some small intimate venues. But yeah, so that's it. Thanks for listening today. Thanks for watching as well. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video. Please leave a comment as well, what you think of Ritchie Blackmore and what's your favourite album by Ritchie Blackmore, what's your favourite solo. Let us know in the comments. Let's talk about it. Have a great day. All the best. And remember, keep shredding.